And welcome back to Hannity. Senator Marco Rubio was very busy on the campaign trail in Florida. He won re-election and is getting ready to serve now his second term. We're happy to have him back on the program. Senator Rubio, congratulations. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you.
All right. I guess the biggest question is Republicans for a long time have said, all right, we need the House. We need the House and Senate, and we also need the White House. Now that moment of opportunity exists. You know Donald Trump's agenda, vetting refugees, building the wall, repealing, replacing Obamacare, 15% corporate tax rate, repatriation, energy independence. Are you in general agreement with everything? Do you have issues with some things? And how do you think this agenda will go in the Senate?
Well, you know, foreign policy, we'll see how that develops. He's had, as I said, he's never held public office before, so he said some things on the campaign trail. We'll see how that translates to foreign policy. But on the issues of domestic policy, you went through some of them. Here's how I think it plays out. I think we spend the early part of January and February working through, you know, dozens and dozens of nominations, not just to the cabinet, but to all sorts of posts underneath that, and try to get those in place as quickly as possible. We move then to Obamacare's repeal, which I think you'll see happen in the first 2 to 3 months of next year, and in addition begin the work of replacing it, because that's important. And then you talk about some other elements. You talk about border security. Building the wall is a phrase that actually is about securing the border and enforcing our immigration laws, and I think that's something we need to move on first. I've said now for a long time that it is the key that unlocks the door to be able to do anything else on immigration. So my view is that the first 3 or 4 months we're going to be busy. I was going over the Senate schedule for next year, and there's very little recess breaks. I mean, it's going to be a lot of work that's been planned into the time frame that we're going to be here, and the reason why is we anticipate being very busy. Those items that we just discussed, not to mention we need a budget. All those things are going to take a lot of time, and I'm excited about finally being in a position to pass laws and repeal laws and have a president that will actually sign it.
What if Senate Democrats are obstructionists? They set the precedent using the nuclear option. Is that something Mitch McConnell should consider?
Well, and where would it come into play? And if you look at the nominations, they changed the rules. And now by 51 votes, we can get anybody confirmed, except for the Supreme Court. And so that's why I fully anticipate that by and large, unless it's someone that something troubling comes out, you're going to see the president-elect get his nominees.
Why couldn't you use it for the Supreme Court, or can you?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I believe we're going to get the Supreme Court nomination with the current rules. I really do. And I know he put out a list during the campaign of very qualified people, and I believe we'll get that nomination. I really do, and I'll leave it at that for now. But as far as all the other ones are concerned, I think we're going to get through those. A lot of good people, names are being mentioned. Obviously, it's his prerogative to choose them. They'll go through our process here, and we're going to move very quickly on that in the early part of the year. And you talk about Obamacare repeal, it was passed through reconciliation. That's 51 votes in the House, in the Senate. And so 51 votes in the Senate, we can repeal Obamacare using the exact same process. And that's, in fact, the Senate's already done that. We just didn't have a president that would sign it. Now we do.
Where are your concerns on foreign policy? He said he'd get rid of the Iranian deal. He'd also said he would identify radical Islamists, but he also talked about foreign entanglements. When we went into Iraq, we had brave men and women fight, bleed, and die for cities like Baghdad, Mosul, Ramadi, Fallujah, and the war got politicized. Over 5,000 dead Americans, and then we pull out, and that created a vacuum for ISIS. I think you can argue we did the same thing in Vietnam. Over 58,000 people died. It seems to me foreign entanglements with the political process the way it is just don't work out. Isn't that something we should really try with all we have to avoid?
Yeah, well, a couple points. I'm not in favor of entanglements. I am in favor of engagement, and I do think the world is a better place when America is involved in the world in a way that furthers our national security interests. Those are broad pronouncements on the campaign trail. It's a big world. There are a lot of issues on foreign policy that were not discussed during the campaign. I can't, quite standing here now, say here's one area in the world where I think we're going to have a conflict with the president-elect. I'm saying it's possible. It happened under other presidencies in the past. But as I said, you know, you've talked about broad pronouncements in general. I agree. We want to defeat radical Islam. We want to call it for what it is. We want to confront it. We want to defeat it. As commander-in-chief, he's going to have a significant amount of leeway to conduct that and make that happen. There might be some differences of opinion on some issues. I don't have one to point to for you right now, but if there is, then we'll do our role, which is the Senate's independent of the presidency, and it's our job, no matter who the president is, if they do something you don't agree with, to stand up to that. But I'm not prepared to do that right now because, as I said, nothing is moving on that, and I think he's still trying to formulate the specifics of a lot of these things.
Yeah, I saw the people of Miami, and they celebrated the death, as did I, frankly, of one of the world's brutal, murdering dictators, Fidel Castro. But then I read the comments of the president, which I thought did not capture the truth of who this man was, and frankly, the Pope, the Prime Minister of Canada. What was your reaction to that? And Donald Trump's comments, I thought, were dead on.
Yeah, I liked what the president-elect put out, and as I said about the time when the president's statements put out, you cannot talk about the legacy of Fidel Castro without discussing the fact that he forced into exile almost 20% of his homeland's population, the fact that he brutally executed people summarily, that he jailed people for 20 to 30 years, that he allowed no political dissent on the island and still did not. Without talking about the human rights abuses, the way he fomented insurrection and revolution all over the world and furthered communism and sowed instability in virtually every country in the hemisphere, you can't leave any of that out. And somebody had a comment the other day, they compared how the press talked about, and the New York Times talked about Pinochet when he died, versus how it described Fidel Castro as some sort of heroic figure. And so for me, any statement about his death has to mention the countless numbers of victims, both because of exile, because of jailing, and because of being murdered by his regime. And no, there is no way to talk about his legacy without talking about that, because to me it is the part that stands out the most.
Well said, Senator. Congratulations on your re-election. Great to have you back.